Good morning. This morning we're going to be looking at a book called Balloons Over Broadway, and it is written by Melissa Sweet. And this is the book that we're going to be looking at today, and it is the true story of the puppeteer of the Macy's Parade. Tony Sarge is his name. Anthony Tony Sarge um, was his name, and it's going to go through why the Macy's Parade was set up, how the idea came about, and then how Tony Sarge came up with balloons and how they're all set up. So, um, this book in particular, I really like because it talks about Tony Sarge and the engineering design process, how he came up with the idea and how he came changing it and fixing it based upon problems that came up. And I think that is a good lesson for all of us. Then, after we're done listening to the story, we're going to have a challenge dealing with our balloons over Broadway book. Um, Now, this Balloons Are Brought It. The Macy's Parade happens at Thanksgiving on Thanksgiving Day in the morning. You can turn it on the TV and you can watch the whole parade. It's in New York City and it is sponsored by the department store Macy's. So let's take a look at our story. And again, if you want to look at this story later, if you want to see, have it read aloud, I have put a link right here for you so that you can link into Kidlit TV and listen to the story again. So let's look at Balloons Over Broadway and the story behind Tony Sarge, the puppeteer. So, Balloons Over Broadway by Melissa Sweet. So it starts off there at the beginning, gives you a little bit of information about Tony Sarge and his marionettes. He was a marionette puppeteer at first, and here they show you some pictures of how he designed his marionettes. So here we have, it says, every little movement has a meaning of its own. And here's a picture of Tony Sarge. And it tells you he was born in 1880 and he died in 1942. His full name was Anthony Tony Frederick Sarge. And it says Sarge rhymes with arg. So it's Sarg, arg. Okay. From the time he was a little boy, Tony Sarg loved to figure out how to make things move. He once said he became a marionette man when he was only 6 years old. His father had asked him to feed their chickens at 6:30 in the morning every day. Tony had an idea. What if he could feed the chickens without leaving his bed? So you can see here he's got a plan for how to feed the chickens. So it says 1, spread feed the night before. 2 says pull rope. 3, door opens. 4, chickens come out. So it says the next morning, Tony pulled on the rope and the door to the chicken coop opened. The chickens ate their breakfast. Tony stayed snug in his bed, and his dad, so impressed, never made Tony do another chore. So he rigged up some pulleys and ran rope from the chicken coop door to the bedroom window. That night, he spread the chicken feed outside the chicken coop door. So here's his plan. You notice that he drew it all up here. So he spread the feed, and then he did that the night before. 2, he pulls the rope from his bedroom window. This opens the door, and then the chickens come out, and the feed is already there. So he outsmarted his dad even. When Tony grew up, he moved to London, where he discovered that no one was making marionettes for kids anymore. So, out of wood, cloth, and strings, Tony began to make puppets. He figured out ways to make his marionettes move so lifelike they performed as if they were real actors. Word soon spread about Tony's amazing marionettes. When Tony moved to New York City, the Tony Sarge marionettes began performing on Broadway. In the heart of New York City, in Herald Square, was the biggest store on earth, R. H. Macy's department store. Macy's had heard about Tony's puppets and asked him to design a puppet parade for the store's holiday windows. So Tony made new puppets based on his storybook characters, then attached them to gears and pulley to make them move. So you can see he did Humpty Dumpty is one of his stories that he had set up. And you can see how he cut and built all of the pieces to make that Humpty Dumpty move with gears and motors. So it was called Macy's Wonder Town. And Macy's Wonder Town windows, Macy's mechanical marionettes danced across the stage as if by magic. All day long, they performed for shoppers jostling to get a better look. But Macy's had an even bigger job in store for Tony. Many of the people working in Macy's were immigrants, and as the holidays approached, they missed their own holiday traditions of music and dancing in the streets. Macy agreed to put on a parade for their employees, and they hired Tony to help. Tony, too, was an immigrant, so he loved the idea of creating a parade based on street carnivals from all over the world. He made costumes and built horse-drawn floats, and Macy even arranged to bring in bears, elephants, and camels from the Central Park Zoo. So you can see here Tony's thinking about the floats and the costumes and the bands and the music. The animals joined hundreds of Macy's employees on Thanksgiving Day, 1924, winding their way from Harlem to Herald Square. It was a dazzling parade. In fact, Macy's first parade was such a success that they decided to have one every year on Thanksgiving Day to celebrate America's own holiday. Each year the parade grew, but when Macy's brought in lions and tigers, in addition to the bears, elephants, and camels, the animals roared and growled and frightened the children. Macy's asked Tony to replace the animals. So Macy's is calling Tony and says, "Can you think of something spectacular?" And Tony says, "Okay." So you can see now Tony has a big job of how to change things. Tony hoped to replace the animals with some kind of puppets, but his marionettes were less than 3 feet tall. He would have to make them much larger puppets in order for them to be seen in the parade. And how could he make them strong enough to hold up in the bad weather, yet light enough to move up and down the streets? Tony knew of the company in Ohio that made blimps out of rubber, the perfect material for any weather. When he called the company and showed them his sketches, they agreed to make what Tony wanted. Still, how would Tony make his big puppets move? So here's the Goodyear blimp. This is where he got his idea from. You notice it floats up pretty high, but he wanted it to be a caterpillar. And you can see here he wanted decorative legs will be made from fabric and attached last. And he saw his colors over here. Tony had an idea from an Indonesian rod puppet in his toy collection. So he thought, what if I had rods down here to control the puppet? On Thanksgiving Day, Tony's creatures, some as high as 16 feet, spilled into the streets, and the crowds cheered wildly. Part puppet, part balloon, the air-filled rubber bags wobbled down the avenues, propped up by wooden sticks. But now the sidewalks were so packed with people that only those in the first few rows could really see the parade. Tony realized his puppets would have to be even bigger and higher off the ground. And though the sticks helped to steer the puppets, they were stiff and heavy. Tony wanted his balloons to articulate, which means to move and gesture, more like puppets. But how? With a marionette, the controls are above and the puppets hang down. But what if the controls were below and the puppets could rise up? And hence where he gets the idea of the balloons controlled by the strings down below. During the next year, Tony set his new idea into motion. This time, he asked the company in Ohio to make balloons out of a rubberized silk, as strong as rubber, but lighter than rubber alone. Most important, Tony ordered the balloons to be filled not just with air, but with helium too. Since helium is lighter than air, it would make the balloons rise. Once the puppets were completed, they were deflated and shipped back to Tony in New York. Tony did not know if everything would go as planned, so he kept asking questions. What if the balloons are filled with too much helium? What if it hits a sharp object? Will they fit through the L, which is the elevated train? It was still dark on Thanksgiving morning when Tony filled the balloons with helium, tethered them down with sandbags. By 1 p.m., the sidewalks were packed with people ready for the parade. Then, one by one, Tony cut the lines to the sandbags. And here you can see the elephant. There's the parade. It's really high up in the air. And the magnificent upside down marionettes rose up to the skies. Nodding and waving to the crowds below, they sailed past Central Park. They sailed up down Broadway. They shimmied and swayed through the canyons of New York City. High above the crowds, they flounced in the afternoon wind, pulling the rope handlers this way and that. Yet with every heave-ho, the balloons gestured and articulated like wild puppets, and the crowds screamed for more. After the balloons were eased under the L, they ended in front of Macy's at Tony's Wondertown window. It was a parade New Yorkers would never forget. And from that day on, every Thanksgiving morning, crowds have lined the sidewalks of New York City to see what new balloons would rise to the sky for Macy's famous parade. Tony Sard, the puppeteer who loved to figure out how to make things move, had set the stage with a little rigging for a puppet to be anything anyone could imagine it to be. And here you can see these are the newspaper articles from the parade back in the early 1900s. So that is our story about Tony Sarge. Notice that he had to think about the materials and how they were made and what materials could work the best. We wanted something sturdy. We needed something that if it would rain, it wouldn't get hurt. So he needed something that would float. So he had to know a lot about the different materials that he used to make this work. So he had to think about a lot of things to get it to work. He had to think about how would I make it move. He also had to think about what is it that I did in the past with smaller things that I could use again, just like the rotted puppet, but change it to make it bigger and better. So as you can see, he used what he already knew to create something better and more advanced. Okay, so if we take a look at that, we're going to, if you have never seen the Macy's Day Parade, I put a link right here for you to, this is last year's, and as you can see right there, if I'm not mistaken, that is from a video game, Dragon Ball Z. And the parade always features the newest characters from movies or books or the newest ideas from our society. So what I want you to do is I want you to watch the video here of the Macy's Day Parade. And then I want you to go to the flip grid. Here's the code. So if you just click on that, it'll take you right to the flip grid. And I want you to tell me about which of those balloons was your favorite from last year's parade and what made it so great. Why do you think it was the best of all of them? So was it the theme? Did you like the character? Did you like the colors? Did you like the way it moved and articulated? What is it was about that balloon that you really, really liked? So I want you to do the flip grid there and tell me about the balloon that you picked as being the best. Then we're going to have our design challenge. And our design challenge, we're going to be thinking about creating and designing our own balloons for the Macy's Parade. So it's almost time for Thanksgiving Day Parade. Unfortunately, the people in charge of blowing up the balloons did not order enough helium to keep all the balloons in the air. So your challenge is to design a balloon for the parade and create a device to keep the balloon floating in the air. Because remember, they don't have helium to do to create that floating that we talked about with our states of matter earlier. So they don't have that helium. So you're going to have to create a device that will prop your balloon up so that it floats, it appears to be floating in the air. So there are some requirements. First, you will need to create your balloon, design your balloon. What kind of theme do you want? Is it a character? Is it something from a movie, something from a book? What kind of character, or is it something brand new that you created out of your head? That's all good. So you design your balloon. You can attach some paper and different things to it to get arms and legs and whatever it is you can imagine. Then you're also going to create a device, something that could carry or hold the balloon up. And it has to be 2 feet off of the ground. So you need to be able to, from your hand, it needs to go up 2 feet. So that you have to think about what would hold your balloon up 2 feet. Okay? And it has to stay upright for at least 30 seconds. Okay? All right, so you think about that. Now, the materials that you're going to get to choose from or that you can use are craft sticks. Now, we have jumbo, the bigger, thicker ones, and regular craft sticks. So you can use those. We have straws, and I'm going to give you two kinds of straws. We have longer, thicker straws and smaller, thinner straws. So those thinner straws are called coffee stirrers. We're going to be putting things together with tape. We also have pipe cleaners you can use, and of course you're going to need a balloon. We have markers, scissors. We're also going to be using construction paper to help us too. So you're going to need to think about what are the characteristics of these materials? Which materials would be best for designing the balloon? Which materials would be best for holding up that balloon? Which materials are stiff enough or maybe they're too flexible? What are the characteristics of these materials and which materials would work the best? And then why? Okay, maybe you find some materials won't work at all and some materials are really great. So you're going to have to think about that. Categorize which materials you want to use the most. Okay, now, so you're going to think about what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is our goal? Well, our goal is, as we said, to create a balloon for the Macy's parade and to also create a carrier that will hold our balloon 2 feet in the air. So I want you to think about how will you use these materials? Which materials will be best for the project? How will you design to keep your balloon floating in the air? What's your carrier going to be like? And what possible problems do you think you could come up when you're building it? So here's a place for you to draw your design, your balloon idea, and your carrier. And over here, you can talk to me about the materials that you're going to use, why you picked those, and any problems that you think could come up during the construction. Okay, so this is your brainstorming page. Now, after you have done your own brainstorming, this is all by yourself, you're going to be getting into a group. And your group then will decide which balloon idea do they like the most, and then which carrier idea do they like the most, or do you want to combine all of the ideas or some of the ideas to create something even better? So once your group comes up with a plan, I want you to sketch here what is your plan. Make sure you add labels. So if you're going to give me Pikachu here, what are you going to use for the ears? What are you going to use for this scarf? What are you going to use to attach the carrier to your balloon? And what materials are you going to use to make your carrier? So I'm going to need to see your labels of what materials you're choosing to use to complete your challenge. Okay. Now, I don't want you to use one that's a balloon that's already been done. I want you to come up with something new. So I don't want to see Pikachu. Now, if you want to use a different Pokemon or come up with something of your own, that's fine. But I don't want to see one that's already in the parade. I want you to come up with a new design for a parade. Now, after you come up with your plan, your team is going to create your balloon and then build your balloon carrier device to keep the balloon afloat. Now, if you want to divide up your team and 2 of you work on the balloon design and 2 of you work on the carrier, that's fine. But you guys are going to need to stay in close contact with one another because your carrier and your balloon have to go together. And so you're going to need to talk about where you're going to attach the carrier, how heavy can the balloon be, those kinds of things. So you're going to need to talk back and forth and test things out to see if it's working. Then you're going to test your device and you're going to think about what really worked well, what was great that you don't want to change. And you can put that here. You know, the best thing about our design was this. This worked really well. What didn't work well? Okay, what failed? And if it failed, what would you do to fix it? So then I want you to think about right down here, what are you going to do to fix that problem? How are you going to improve it to make it better? So what is your new plan? So come up and write your new plan. If you want a piece of paper or flip it on the back to draw a new design, that is fine, because your idea here is to create, test, and improve. Now you might get stuck here for a little while. So I don't want you to get frustrated. You may have to improve it several times to get it where you finally want it and where you feel successful. Then, when you're finished, you're going to do another Flipgrid individually or with your group, and you're going to record a video and be sure to tell me about your project. Tell me about your balloon. Why did you pick that design? Why did you pick that character? How did you design it? How did you put on the decorations? Then, how did you design your carrier? What worked really well? What didn't work very well? What were the challenges that you faced? And what was your success? And I'd like to see your balloon and your video and your carrier. So, and if all goes well, we may have our own little parade through the school. So make sure that you give me the Flipgrid, show me what you have created, and let's see what kind of parade that we can come up with. All right, so you're off. You know what you need to do. I'm here to help you if you need any help or guidance, but I'd like to see some great teamwork today. All right, thanks so much, guys. Enjoy.